So Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York announced that she's running for president. This is not really a surprise. She was on the short list of people who we were pretty much certain was going to run. I want to go ahead and go through her record here in detail. We have the good and the bad. So first, let's go to the good. She supported the Stimulus Act, which, was important to try to get us out of a recession, the Great Recession. If I was there, I would have voted for the Stimulus Act as well. I mean, I think if anything, it should have been bigger. But it's good that she supported it. She supported the GM bailout. I think that's good as well. Now, at the same time, the problem that most corporate Democrats had is that they voted for those things, but then also voted for the bank bailout at the same time, which I, of course, would not have voted for. I think it's a terrible idea, and you incentivize the terrible behavior that got us into the mess in the first place when you give them a lifeline when they made the decisions that bankrupted their companies and crashed the world economy. Now, Kirsten Gillibrand, surprisingly, voted against the bank bailout, which actually is kind of amazing because, again, most corporate Democrats did the right thing on the Stimulus Act and the GM bailout, but then when it came to the bank bailout, they voted for it, which I don't think is the right way to vote, and she voted against it. So that's kind of impressive, if I'm being honest. She also voted in favor of regulating subprime mortgages. That's super important. She's in favor of reinstating Glass-Steagall. Again, very important. She has a pro-gay rights voting record. She supports legalizing marijuana. She supports Bernie's free college bill. She voted to, quote, protect American jobs from going overseas. That was in 2006. But at the same time, there were other so-called free trade deals that she ended up supporting. Like, she supported a free trade deal with Peru. So I would say she has a mixed record when it comes to outsourcing. Now, she's also for reimportation and negotiation of drug prices, which is super important. She recently decided, okay, I'm gonna do what the new important thing is that this new left movement is forcing people to do, which is I'm not going to take any corporate PAC money. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second because put a pin in that because it's not as straightforward as it sounds. It's not like, okay, well, she did the right thing here and so we don't have to worry about her on the money and politics front. It's more complicated than that in her case. And again, I'll explain that in a little bit when we get to the negative. And then the other interesting thing about her is that she voted against all of Trump's picks. All of his cabinet picks that, the Senate and Congress has to vote on. She has the most anti-Trump voting record on that front. And I think, honestly, that that's savvy politics on her part. Because now she knows that when she's running for president and she's on stage, she gets to turn around to everybody else on stage and go, you can't question, my record when it comes to being a lefty. I voted for none of Trump's picks when even, Bernie voted for a handful of them. So, hey, I guess I'm further left than Bernie. So she's giving herself outs. This is savvy politics on her part. She's giving herself, a credibility to make an argument, even though it would be a questionable argument that, oh yeah, I'm the furthest left. I'm the real lefty option over here. So you gotta. She's clever. By the way, she also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but she also recently came out in favor of Medicare for all. Listen, that's a wonderful thing. I'm happy she supports it. But I do make a distinction between the people who have kind of been for it all along and the ones who just recently hopped on the bandwagon, because I think that shows you how much they'll prioritize it when they're in office and how much they'll fight for it. Somebody who led the way, like a Bernie Sanders, you know that when he gets in there, he's not playing around and he's going to fight for that come hell or high water and twist arms and do whatever he's got to do to get it. Whereas somebody who just recently kind of hopped on the bandwagon, even though I think it's wonderful that they did, and I think that they deserve credit for that, I think that they don't go in as good of a category as somebody who has, been for it all along. So I think we need to make a little bit of a distinction, even though I want to give her credit for supporting Medicare for all. You give the early supporters more credit, in my opinion. Now, let's get to the bad. So listen, I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised going through her record, where I was like, okay, she's not as bad as I thought she was. Like, she's got a bunch of interesting things in her record where it's like, okay, that's actually a really interesting and unique and good thing. Like, for example, not voting for the bank bailout when so many corporate Democrats supported the bank bailout. So I was pleasantly surprised. But the bad also, there's a decent amount of bad as well along with the good. So here's the bad. She voted to, or she supports the idea of cutting the public debt in half over a 5-year period. Now, some people might say, well, that seems benign. I don't see what the problem is with that. Well, the problem is that's a very right-wing idea, and it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of economics. All of the debt and deficit scolds, you'll notice something about them. Ultimately, they only trot out those arguments of being deficit hawks and caring about balancing the budget when it's on the backs of regular people. None of the deficit and debt scolds said anything when we had over $1 trillion, $1 trillion in tax cuts for the rich that just passed, and all of it was added on the deficit. Nobody cared. Nobody said anything. Nobody said, how are we going to pay for this? What are we going to do here? How can we afford this? Nobody said it. So they only trot out those arguments about cutting the national debt and cutting the deficit when somebody floats like free college. Now, I'm not saying Kirsten Gillibrand has made those arguments of, hey, I'm not in favor of bold progressive priorities because it would hurt the debt and the deficit. She hasn't made that case. But back in the day, and you're going to notice a theme here, she was a lot more centrist and I would say corporatist as well. And so she, hook, line, and sinker, she was with the right-wing deficit scolds, which is why she supported the idea of cutting the debt in half over a 5-year period, which, by the way, would have devastating effects on the economy. Devastating effects. So that's the first thing. Now, you could say, well, that's a small thing. No big deal. Okay, well, let's move on. She used to be very pro-gun, but then flipped to being very anti-gun. Now, you could say, I'm sure a lot of my audience believes, hey, that's an evolution in the right direction. And she says, hey, I did it because I'm representing my constituents. She used to be a congressperson from a pretty right-leaning district, even though she's a Democrat and she was elected as a Democrat. So when she was representing that district, she was more pro-gun. And then when she became senator of New York, then she became very anti-gun, and her stance is, well, I'm representing my constituents. When I was representing a small right-leaning congressional district, what was I going to do? Of course, I'm going to vote pro-gun, and now I see the light, and I'm very anti-gun. Now, she went after Bernie, though. She went after Bernie in 2016. She was an early supporter of Hillary Clinton, and she went after Bernie because, he's not sensitive enough to gun violence victims. Bernie has a D rating from the NRA. Bernie's history of votes on gun issues is more pro-gun regulation than your history of on gun issues. So she's a hypocrite, and she went after Bernie on this issue in a very smeary way where he claims like, he doesn't even care about the victims of shootings. Fuck are you talking about? Because he had a handful of votes that aren't anti-gun, which actually were, I think, totally reasonable votes. They weren't crazy or anything. Again, he has a D rating from the NRA. So she's done a little bit of flip-floppington on guns. Now we get into some more really bad stuff. She originally supported the anti-BDS bill. Oh boy, here we go. So the anti-BDS bill is just a flat-out attack on First Amendment rights. There's over 20 states in the country where there's laws on the books now where they say, you will not get a government contract if you support a boycott of Israel. So it's singling out specific political speech and punishing it. That is 100% against the First Amendment. In fact, 2 courts, and one in Arizona, one in, I think, Kansas, has ruled that it's against the First Amendment. So it's an attack on free speech and free expression. And she supported the original anti-BDS bill. Now, since then, there was a giant public backlash of, actual lefties when she supported it. So what did she do? She weaseled out of it by writing an op-ed and saying, well, hey, I'm one of the staunchest supporters of Israel, don't get me wrong, but the language is too specific in this bill, and maybe it does cross the line in being against the First Amendment. So I want everybody to know I'm now withdrawing my support for the anti-BDS bill, but if they change it around a little bit, I'd be for it. Okay, well, then that's a problem. So she's very pro-Israel, if you can't tell, and there's going to be candidates on stage who are better on that issue. She also used to be a member of the Blue Dog Democrats. Now, she's not anymore, and you determine how much you want to hold that against her. But she used to be a member of the centrist corporatist group. Actually, the Blue Dog Democrats are just really the right-wing Democrats, not even the centrists. They're just right-wing. But again, you can determine how much you want to hold that against her, because when it came to, like, Tulsi Gabbard, for example, she was either in or had a close relationship with the New Democrats a while ago, and that's the centrist Democrat group. And again, you could say, well, she's not that anymore. Tulsi Gabbard supported Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. So again, you have to weigh in your mind how much you trust a lot of these evolutions of these politicians and their beliefs, and how much you think it's just disingenuous flip-flopping and hypocrisy to try to find a lane to weasel your way into office, basically. She also voted yes on retroactive immunity for telecom's warrantless surveillance. Now we're getting into like super duper serious territory where she's just dead wrong. Because that's a pro illegal spying vote is what it is, and a pro corporate vote, because these telecoms were like, hey, we want to get off for any responsibility if we were doing spying and we were doing it at the behest of the government. I mean, we don't want to feel the consequences of that. And senators like Kirsten Gillibrand were like, yeah, rock on. You shouldn't feel any consequences for this, so you should be able to spy on Americans and have no accountability afterwards and not take responsibility, and you should be able to get away with that. I mean, that's like a pro NSA, pro deep state, illegal, unconstitutional idea. And she was for it. And that's terrible. Now, in 2007, Democrats were trying to attach a timetable for withdrawal to the funding in the Iraq War. And this was back when the Democrats were, more anti-war. I know it's hard to remember this for a lot of people, but back during the Bush years, when we were, 4 years, 5 years into the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, there were like many Democrats were like, okay, what's going on here? This is open-ended war. This is kind of crazy. Why are we doing this? We need to get out. And they were starting to take some stands. And so this is an example of one of those times. In 2007, they were like, all right, if you want us to fund the Iraq war, we'll do that, but you need a timetable for withdrawal. We're not just going to open-ended fund it. That's crazy. And Kirsten Gillibrand was one of very few Democrats who broke with the Democrats who were standing up for the anti-war position and went with the Republicans and said, no, we don't need a timetable for withdrawal. I'm going to be on the Republican side and say, open-ended war is fine. Oh, boy. She also supports the death penalty. At least 4% of the time, we kill innocent people with the death penalty. So if you're for the death penalty, you're okay with the state murdering innocent people 4% of the time. There's also racial disparities where a white person and a black person commit the same crime, and a black person is way more likely to get the death penalty. So it's not even, even to the extent that people support it, it's not even implemented fairly, effectively, properly. It is implemented in a bigoted way. So to support that, in 2019. Now, in her defense, over 50% of the country supports the death penalty. This is a rare issue where the left-wing position is actually not the popular position. But I don't know. If you're running in a Democratic primary, and we know the problems with the death penalty, a little outdated that you're for it. She also used to be pretty conservative on immigration. She has since flipped on those issues. And, all right, let's get to the biggest ones here. Only 32% of her funding comes from small donors. Now, she made a big stink about me? Oh, I'm hopping on the left-wing bandwagon now, and I'm saying I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. Now, I don't want anybody to misunderstand me here. Does she deserve credit for taking that stance? The answer is absolutely yes. Because we can't demand, it can't be damned if you do, damned if you don't. We can't demand that these politicians stop taking corporate PAC money, and then once they stop taking corporate PAC money, we turn around and go, I'm not going to give you credit for that. Then what the fuck? Then why are we begging them to stop taking corporate PAC money? So no, of course you give them credit for that, because that gets rid of the most obvious avenue of corruption. That's what that means when they stop taking corporate PAC money. The most obvious avenue of corruption is now gone. However, there is an asterisk here. The asterisk is that's not the only form of corrupting money. It's not. It's just not. The other form of corruption is what's called big money bundling. So if you have this dinner where you get all fucking bankers and shit from JP Morgan Chase and all other people from Wall Street together in a room, they pay X amount per plate, and then you bundle money from individuals, and in these situations, most of them pay the max individual donation, which is $2,700. So you have a room full of executives from Wall Street. They all pool in $2,700 each, and then she walks out of that dinner netting however much money, you want, maybe let's say $100,000 or something like that. And then she gets to turn around and say, "Me, I didn't take corporate PAC money, so it's not corruption." No, but it is. If you're taking corporate PAC money, or if you're doing big money bundling, then yeah, both of those things are forms of corruption. So what's the ideal? Well, the ideal situation is if we get money out of politics, obviously, and we have clean elections, which is publicly financed elections. That's the ideal situation. But short of that, so in our current uber corrupt system, what's the best indicator of how pro-regular people a politician is? The answer is very simple. Small dollar donations. So under law, a small dollar donation is a $200 donation or less. And as a general rule, regular people give those donations $200 or less. Now, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a big individual donor that's not corrupt, because there is such a thing. I mean, it's certainly possible for an accountant named Bob who lives in Toledo to donate $2,000 or $2,700 to a politician because that politician wants Medicare for all and Bob wants Medicare for all. But it's a good indicator if most of a politician's money comes from small dollar donors, chances are that politician is not corrupt and they're really just representing the people. For Kirsten Gillibrand, only 32% of her money comes from small dollar donors. So a lot of her money comes from big donor bundling. So even though she got rid of the most obvious avenue of corruption, which is not taking corporate PAC money, and she deserves credit for that, the fact that a lot of her money comes from big donor bundling, that is a problem. And it is like she kind of weaseled her way out of the most obvious form of corruption, traded it for a different form of corruption, and now wants the praise for, as if she's not corrupt. Now, to give you a point of reference here and to do a comparison for you, what percentage of Bernie's money comes from small dollar donors? 76%. So, again, as a general rule, you probably want a little over 50% of the money coming from small dollar donors. It's possible to have big individual donors over $200 and not be corrupt, but it's just that it would most likely have to be not at one of those shitty dinners where you get all these executives in a room, you know? Like, and even when Bernie takes contributions over $200, it really is more from regular people. And even Bernie has taken some PAC money, but it's more benign PACs than the corporate PACs. It's like labor PACs, you know? So campaign finance is a complicated, convoluted thing in many respects, and you need a fine-tooth comb to go through everybody's record to figure out what the hell is really going on. But it's good that Kirsten Gillibrand doesn't take corporate PAC money, but her big money bundling, that is a problem, and we should talk about that. And then she's also, it was just reported the other week, she's been courting big money Wall Street donors for the 2020 race. You know who else has? Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. So even though she has had some anti-Wall Street votes, I mean, to not vote for the bank bailout, yes, that's an anti-Wall Street vote. Let's be clear. But she also has been courting Wall Street executives. It was just reported because she thinks I'm going to probably need their support if I want to win in 2020. So, but listen, that's the thing is like we already knew, roughly speaking, where Kirsten Gillibrand falls in the spectrum between lefty and corporate Democrat. Now, there's going to be degrees of difference between all the different candidates, and there is going to be a hierarchy. And, you know, your hierarchy might slightly differ from my hierarchy. And again, when the field is settled, I will give the ultimate power rankings and where I think each candidate falls. But given her voting record and all the other information, she's a corporate Democrat, but one of the slightly better corporate Democrats because she has bucked orthodoxy and not been a total down-the-line corporatist. But yeah, there's plenty of concerning stuff there. And finally, I touched on this before, but she supported Bernie Sanders she supported Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders in 2016, and early on, and vociferously so. I mean, it's hard to get past that because when you're presented with the option of the corporatist, neoliberal, centrist warmonger or the social democrat who's been pushing for social democracy his entire career, that's not a tough choice. And when you actively go in the wrong direction on that, yes, I'm going to question your sincerity and your integrity and how much you would push for social democratic ideas, which is my preference, how much you're going to actually push for that if you're elected. It makes a lot of what you're doing seem like just an act to try to get in power, and then best case scenario, you'll act like another Obama in a very voting in a very centrist way and governing in a very centrist way. So I think that's an important fact, and it's hard for me to overlook that. You know, supporting Hillary over Bernie early on, and then also sometimes getting too carried away with the identity stuff. I mean, I'm in favor of having a pro-woman voting record, of course, but I don't want identity to be a stand-in for actual policy substance, and we've seen that so much in the modern era. I mean, Hillary was half running on that. It was a bunch of platitudes, bunch of cliches, and I'm a woman, it's going to be history. Not enough. Not enough. I need policy. And she also was mentored by Chuck Schumer. So, I don't know, man. I don't know. The reason I'm doing all these segments, I've done a breakdown of Richard Ojeda's record, breakdown of Tulsi Gabbard's record, breakdown of Kirsten Gillibrand's record, is that I want everybody... I don't want you to watch these segments and come away with it trying to just like mimic or mirror whatever my opinion is on the issue. I give you all the information and all the policy details and all about their record so you can make your own mind up. And you can determine, okay, where do I put this person in the power rankings? But anyway, there you have it. Kirsten Gillibrand running for president in 2020. I'm not upset that she's in the race. I'm not, because I do think she leans slightly more to the corporatist side of the spectrum than the lefty side of the spectrum. And like I said, the one thing we need to happen is there needs to be more corporatists than leftists in the race so that the corporatists split their vote more. So I say welcome her to the race. And we'll see what happens in 2020. But this field is starting to settle in. So, you know, Bernie, Do the launch, big guy. We're all waiting. And that's where my support goes, and I'm sure many of you as well. That's where my support goes if he happens to jump in the race, which I think he definitely is going to do.